everyone. What if I told you the biggest reason most of us feel stuck, scattered, or burnt out has nothing to do with money, time, or even strategy? And it has everything to do with a forgotten part of ourselves. Today, I'm speaking with someone who's dedicated her life to bringing that part back to the surface. Her name is none other than Dena Merriam, and she is, without exaggeration, a living bridge between ancient feminine wisdom and modern day awakening. Dena is the founder of the Global Peace Initiative of Women, and she's worked with global organizations, written books that read like soul memories, and guided thousands across the world to remember who they truly are, not just in this life, but across lifetimes. So let me be clear, this episode isn't just about spirituality. Well, it isn't about spirituality, but it's about reclaiming that disowned part of ourselves and that unknown power. It's about that invisible wound that so many high achieving women and men carry inside them. A wound that says, be smaller, be quieter, be less of whatever you think you are. And we are going to call it out today. The wounded feminine. Yes, it shows up when we shrink from visibility, when we second guess our worth, and when we disconnect from that wild, wise, intuitive force that once ran through our great grandmother's blood. So here's the truth: you can't build lasting wealth, or real love, or peaceful legacy until you own up that disowned version of yourself. Today, we're not talking about tips or tools or strategies. We're talking about soul level healing. We're talking about dancing with the Dakinis, fierce, untamed forces of feminine truth, and remembering the fire that was never really lost, just forgotten. So, if you've ever felt like something inside you went quiet, this conversation, it's your wake up call. So let's dive in with none other than Dena Merriam. Hi, Dena, and welcome back to the Eternal Life podcast. I am so excited to be speaking to you today about a topic which is very close to my heart. Namaste.
Day, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Dina. So, Dina, today I read a little bit of Dancing with the Dakinis, and I'm super curious about talking about the book and also talking a little bit about the wounded feminine. Well, that's the main topic for today, is that from your remembrances and from where you stand today and you look at women around you, I'd like to understand from you what is the wounded feminine, and let's just start with that. What do you see across cultures, across generations, as to where do we stand in our collective consciousness as the feminine, and what part have we even forgotten and is wounded, if at
I mean,
all?
to me, the best example of the wounded feminine is how Sita has been treated in through history. How this great Devi has been turned into a victim, and which is what has led me to spend so much time trying to rectify that narrative. Because, and so let me just stay with that for a few minutes, because the story of Ram and Sita goes back several thousands of years to a time that was pre-patriarchal. It was the Treta Yuga. And the higher yugas, there was no concept of domination. There were egalitarian societies. But the story was a narrative. It wasn't written down because writing didn't come till much later.
Yeah.
And in the process, by the time writing came, there was already a decline in consciousness, and we get the advent of the patriarchal era, in which there was really little understanding of the Devi, and so Sita becomes the victim, kidnapped and then exiled. And so it's the exiling of the divine feminine, really. And this happened in all societies where the feminine just got exiled. You look at the Western religious traditions; they're extremely patriarchal,
Yes, Mary
and
Magdalene,
so
for example.
yeah, and so to me, that's the wounded feminine. But we've moved out of that now, and we still have shadows and remnants of that era with us. But essentially, we're moving into a higher era, higher consciousness. And so there has been a lot of progress in bringing the feminine back into the consciousness. And that's been a lot of my work on many, and this takes place on every level. I'm more interested in the spiritual level of reclaiming the feminine aspect of the divine, but you see it in our political life, in our economic life, in our social life, where women are really seeking to assume their rightful place in the life of our society on all levels. And it's two steps forward, one step back, two steps forward. That's the way progress happens. But I'm most concerned with on a spiritual level. When I first started around 2000, the early to mid 2000, maybe 2005, 2006, something like maybe it was 2008. I did a conference in India on the divine feminine and invited women, not just women, but spiritual leaders from around the world. And many of the leaders from the West didn't know how to deal with this. They said, we don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, just come and listen. And after that, some of them started talking about the divine feminine in their speeches. And it was a real awakening moment for them to even delve into that subject, to what is that divine feminine? So I think that there's this slow return, and certainly a lot has changed since then. People can talk about that very openly now. People can talk about the Devi. People can, even in the Western traditions, people are searching in their own tradition. Where is the divine feminine in my tradition, in Judaism and Christianity? And so people are looking for it. It's not as evident because those are religions that were developed during a patriarchal era. But she can be found. She could be found in every tradition.
Yes, Dina, she could be found, but she could be found in a divine form as a Devi. A lot of men worship the Devi, but then that becomes a divine feminine, which is on a pedestal, which is the feminine that they can worship as a Devi. But when they turn around to their own counterparts, their wives, their daughters, I mean, and I'm speaking globally, I'm talking about the culture that I saw in the West and in India and everywhere. I mean, yes, you can put the divine feminine on a pedestal and worship her as the mother. But I see so much around me, this whole, uh, this whole hypocrisy around where is the place of the woman in society. And I think the more important thing that I want to talk about today is that we as women don't have a reference point of that feminine power. As you very rightly said, it's starting from how Sita's story, and I only started to learn about the real inner workings of the whole thing after I read your book, Untold Story of the Sita. Until and unless, before that, I had the same narrative that Sita was the weakling that had to be saved, had to be protected, was crucified for, like, all sorts of, like, the whole victim uh, narrative.
You know, it's the same thing as people around the world will claim to be religious, and then they'll go out and abuse somebody, abuse a family member, or sanction an abusive behavior. It's this disconnect between what our spiritual traditions teach us and how we behave. And I think that this is a very common problem. People preach one thing and do another. And so it's certainly very true in attitudes toward women. And I think it's progress comes in bits and pieces. As I said, you take two steps forward and then one step back. And I think that I mean, the more it's a matter of our aligning our behavior with Dharma, what we know to be Dharma. We know to be the essential teachings of all spiritual traditions. And, this involves some self-reflection. I also think in the process, you can't harm the divine feminine without harming the masculine. Look
Yes.
how Ram has been treated. I mean, how much anger there is toward Ram because of this complete misrepresentation of the story.
Yes.
And here he is considered to be the epitome of Dharma, and yet he's accused of doing an adharmic act. It's a disconnect. How can the epitome of Dharma conduct himself in an adharmic way? And that's why I look at how the story has been portrayed and say, didn't anybody realize this? There's a complete disconnect here between holding him up as epitome of Dharma and then saying he committed one of the most egregious adharmic acts. So, it's reclaiming both the higher energies of the divine masculine and the higher energies of the divine feminine. And when we will have done that, we will have advanced a lot as a society.
Yes, it's beautiful, Dina, how you put it. And let's go to your book, Dancing with the Dakinis. It's very fascinating. Could you just shed some light on who are these Dakinis? What is their fierce freedom, wild self even look like? And let's start with that, actually.
So Dakinis, as we know, are beings that live in a higher astral realm, spiritual beings who may or may not have had an earthly incarnation. They may have sort of finished their earthly rounds of karma and now live in those celestial worlds, or may have never had an earthly incarnation. And they're beings who are not, I wouldn't say perfected beings. They're still on their journey. But you find the wounded feminine in that book as well. I think you find her in all of my books. In that book, I don't want to give away too much of it, but you find that the main character, when remembering a past life, recalls a life in the Middle Ages in Europe, where she witnesses the burning of her church. Women were burned at that time. Now, what is a more obvious example of the killing of the divine feminine than the burning of women who were called witches, but may have held healing powers? This woman was a healer, and she was considered to be a witch, and so she was burned. And that left such a deep imprint on the character, and I have to say, a deep imprint on me, because when I write about that character, I'm writing about my own past. And I have long held this sort of resistance to Christianity because it was in the Christian world that I witnessed this taking place. And I had to resolve that issue within myself. In writing the book, I did resolve it and say, well, this was not the true teachings of Christianity. This was the misinterpretation. Just as there was a misinterpretation of Sita, there was a misinterpretation, a misunderstanding of these women healers. And because they couldn't understand, they just wanted to get rid of them. And so there's been a lot of, I mean, one of my main interests is in how do you resolve karma. There's been a lot of negative collective karma incurred from the from the violence against women. And how do we heal that collective karma? That's something that we all need to reflect on individually and collectively, because it's a collective problem. The violence against women, which manifested in so many ways, is a shadow that lingers in the human collective.
Yes. Yes.
And in the dance, the dance with Dakinis covers three different lifetimes, and shows how karma gets worked out. Um, and I have seen, and I think many women have felt that, many of us who have had numerous lifetimes as women, because we don't always incarnate as women. You incarnate wherever you need to learn whatever lessons you need to at that time. But many of us have incarnated over numerous lives as women. And so we carry with us the feeling of not having our own voice, of not being able to control our own lives. It's only recently that women can make decisions about their own life.
Yes.
The last 100 years, maybe, or a little bit more. I mean, in different parts of society, it's in different parts of the world, it's different. But until recently, women did not have control over their own lives.
Yes.
We marry, whether we can work or not, how we fulfill ourselves, you know, the constrictions around our lives, even in some places today, whether you can travel. I mean, look, there's some places today where women have to stay inside and all be all covered up. I mean, these are collective shadows that influence us all. One thing I've learned through my writing that what happens in one part of the world affects us all.
Yes.
You can't seclude it and say, well, that doesn't affect me. It affects us all.
Yes, 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 yes. And Dina, one thing is about carrying our own remembrances or imprints of our previous lives and the wounded feminine, all those things that you're talking about. Even this burning of the witches, it just really shakes my soul as well. I don't know if I have whatever, there is some kind of a chill that goes up my spine when I think of that. But what about also what is getting passed down from mothers to daughters, grandmothers to mothers? This whole silent expectation, like even simple things like growing up hearing, and I've heard that in different parts of the world, that girls should be seen, not heard. A young girl it's so harmless if you think of it, but it's so harmful at one level as well. Simple things as like, you should, and so many narratives that are passed down from generations. How do we even call
The
out
hope is that the women of your generation will not pass it down to their daughters and sons, because it has to be both. I mean, I see this as not just a women's issue, but a men's issue as well.
Yes.
It's a collective issue. And I think moving toward a more egalitarian society, that's the direction we're moving toward. Uh, where a lot of it, but it takes us each doing our own work. So the more we individually can free ourselves of our own shadows, the more we clear the collective. And that's one of the things. I'm just finishing a new book called Sita's Yoga. And that's one of the things that comes through very strongly, the relationship between the individual and the collective. How do we clear the collective shadows? By clearing our own shadows, because we are adding to that collective. And so the more that we can, every person, men and women, really be in our own dignity and realize that, we have to make peace with the past, and we have to shed the past. We have to, because there have been several thousands of years where we've passed through a very darkened age, the Kali Yuga. And in order to move into the higher age, it really means shedding a lot of mindsets. And we are doing it. We are in the process of doing that. But it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over several centuries, actually. And I think this movement, maybe began 100, 200 years ago, where there was slowly a readjusting of the relationship. And there's a bit of a backlash now because women have come out so strongly. There's a bit of a backlash. I know here in the US, there's a bit of a backlash against that. But it's temporary. It's temporary. And we mustn't be cowed by that, because there's only one way to move, and that's ahead, not backwards.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. So, Dina, somebody who's watching this show, uh, what do you recommend? How does one even start the process of letting go of the shadows and healing one's own woundedness first to bring it into the collective consciousness?
I think first it's recognizing it. In other words, introspection is a big part of the process. Uh, uh, and my hope is that reading the two books that I've written on Sita, The Untold Story and now Sita's Yoga, will help with that process of introspection, because we each carry different wounds. Most women carry that wound of not being heard, not having a voice. but we each carry our own past wounds, and it's very important to recognize what we need to shed. And then, in terms of how we shed them, well, spiritual practice helps. Meditating, looking at yourself objectively, watching your reactions, because those wounds will come up again and again in your relationship with other people. Uh, uh, so it's very important to look at your reactions, how you're reacting to people. I know quite a few women who are in abusive relationships, not the most worst where they're being physically abused, but on levels of either verbal abuse or mental abuse. And yet they don't have the confidence and the really maybe financial ability to leave those relationships. It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage. Uh, uh, and I'm not saying that sometimes those things can't be worked out in an honest, reflective way, or really standing up for your own dignity and empowering your inner self, and finding what the right course is. And so these are challenges that many women face. And I think so. I would say, looking at your own shadows, really going into a process of introspection so that you can address them instead of pushing them under the rug and just not wanting to deal with them.
Yes, Dina, and that's one side of the story, like the, typical damsel in distress story that you've talked about, that character that she's playing out in terms of that. But I have experienced the other side of that story, that if a woman is self-reliant, is assertive, has a mind of her own, is very successful in the world, she's also either her own narrative or subtly in society, she's also subtly diminished to question her worth, because
She's
she
judged.
yeah, she's still judged and
She's
punished. So she also thinks that I need to dim my light so that I'm accepted, because she's feeling like, as if there's something wrong with her self expression or herself. You see what I mean? Maybe I'm not expressing it well enough.
I totally know what you mean. And I think along the journey, one of the things one has to look at is non-judgment. And it's not just in you judging others, but in judging yourself and accepting others' judgment of you. And that helps one gain the strength to reject others' judgment of you. Uh, uh, we are a judging society. It's one of the you know, and yet it's a weakness, a spiritual weakness. So in this book that I'm writing, Sita's Yoga, there's a whole chapter on the yoga of non-judgment. Because as we judge, we all make judgments about people. We're constantly making judgments. Sometimes they're subtle. You say something. I mean, after writing this chapter, I've become very mindful of where I'm allowing judgment to come into my mind of somebody. And until you know the history, the before, until you know where the future, where they're going, you really can't make a judgment. So as we shed judgments of others, then we become immune to judgment of ourselves.
Wow.
And I think that's the twofold process, not judging others, not allowing ourselves to be judged. So you can't, it's not your problem if somebody is judging you, it's their problem. But not to react to that, not to dim your light, not to become quiet, not to react to their judgment, because that's their problem. I think that's part of this whole yoga of non-judgment.
Beautiful. I can't wait for the book to come out. When do you think roughly it is?
Before the end of the year.
Okay, brilliant.
I'm in the final stages of editing, and then it has to go to proofing and printing. So it's just a few more months.
And Dina, once the book is out, of course, a lot of people are eagerly awaiting, as much as I am as well. Have you thought, or do you have any vision or any ideas around some kind of, I keep bringing it up because I really need that direction from your side as to how do you, when you say it has to go from individual fixing to collective consciousness, is there a vision in mind as such as this point of how do you think this can be rolled out for greater and bigger awareness? Besides, of course, the book will be there as a reference point to go through, but as an activity or some kind of a movement almost, I
Thought of I thought of doing a retreat in India on the book Each chapter is a different yoga. The yoga of non-judgment, the yoga of non-reaction. How do we not react to events in our life, negative events? How do we? I mean, that's very important. As long as you're reacting, you're creating suffering for yourself. So, and then, the yoga of generosity. How do we cultivate the qualities that counter the negative qualities that abound in the world? Greed. How do we counter greed? Through generosity. And how do we counter pride, arrogance? Through humility. So there are each chapter is a different way in which we can help clear ourselves of our shadows and help clear the collective. And understanding the relationship, we see all the terrible things in the world and we say, oh my God, isn't that terrible? Without realizing that unknowingly we contribute.
Yeah.
Every time we judge another, every time we have a negative emotion, every time we're angry, every time we feel hatred, we are contributing to that. And how do we stem that? And so the questions arise in the book. How do you not feel anger toward harmful behavior?
Yeah.
Well, there was Sita and Ram fighting Ravana. So, I mean, there's a tremendous metaphor in that story because we have Ravana. What is Ravana? But those negative forces that are destructive, and Ravana is very alive in our world today. How
Yeah.
do we react to those negative forces without falling victim ourselves to negative energies?
Yeah.
So these are the perennial questions um, that we have to face in order to move forward spiritually.
Yeah. One final question because it's just something that's coming in my mind. And I just feel that, I feel there's one thing in knowing something like, we've all been brought up to believe in all the virtues of the world and we should be practicing all the virtues and everything. But then still there is something inside of us only that also wants, to run wild free and not always be thinking about being the most highest virtuous person as well.
Now, it depends upon everybody's at a different stage in their spiritual journey.
Yeah.
If you want to be free of all karma, it doesn't mean you don't return to earth, come back, but you come back voluntarily, not through karmic compulsion. You come back to serve. So there's nothing wrong with enjoying your life, but realizing that there are ways to avoid creating future karma that will play out in the future if you live more consciously, more aware of how, because every action, every thought, every word puts out an energy into the universe that naturally comes back because that's the universe's way of maintaining equilibrium. So once one is aware of that, you're just becoming more conscious. If you want to live a free wild life, that's fine, but you have to be aware there could be consequences there.
Yes, I mean, I'm just suddenly thinking, Dina, I mean, who also put the narrative that spirituality means being totally virtuous or sage-like or saint-like and lead a life like that. I mean, when we're talking about the divine feminine, we also know and we also have references of all the Devis in their full, like, glory and power and dance, music, celebrations, which is what you bring out in the Rukmini book as well. That narrative has suddenly been taken away from all, this concept of, and maybe that's also one of the things that,
A
should come
great
back.
one of the great aspects of the Devi is beauty and
Yeah.
celebration of beauty. And all of the creative arts, they come from the Devis. They come from the Devis and the Devas. But living a virtuous life means causing no harm.
Yes.
It's as simple. I mean, who wants to cause harm, right? Well, there are people who don't mind causing harm, but to live a spiritual life, it means doing your best not to cause harm to others through your actions or through your speech, and then even through your thoughts, which gets subtler and subtler. It's first your actions, and then your speech, and then your thoughts. And so, one can fulfill one's desires. There's nothing wrong with buying beautiful things, living a comfortable life, but it's the causing harm
Yes.
that is the most serious thing that brings a negative return to us.
Yes, and yes, that's beautifully put. That really rests my inner conflict with the idea of,
Dance, enjoy life,
yeah,
you know, and music, but be very conscious of not causing harm, even to oneself.
yes, 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 yes. Brilliant. I think we'll put this one to an end now. Dina, any final words for the women and the men who are going to be watching it and delighting over these beautiful ideas that have come out?
There was a story in the book that I'm writing now about a very humble man who comes to Mata Sita and she won't see him. And Soma, her attendant, is amazed because she's never rejected anybody. And Soma asks her why she won't meet him. And Mata says, when he stops judging, then I'll meet him. And Soma says, but he doesn't judge anybody. He's such a good man. I've examined his mind. He doesn't judge anybody. And Sita says, only himself. And it's true. Every time he tries to go see Sita and she won't see me back, and he starts dissecting himself and quit. I'm not good enough. And finally, he comes to the realization, oh, that's just the mind. That's not me. That's the mind doing its thing. I'm not the mind. I'm not the one judging. Then Sita comes to him.
Oh, beautiful.
So non-judgment means not judging yourself. Society could make you feel diminished. We're causing harm if we accept those judgments from society. So coming into your own power, that's a big part of one's spiritual growth, is coming into your own power, not developing an ego, but knowing yourself as part of the divine, as part of the Devi.
Brilliant, beautiful, Dina. Thank you so much for breaking this down this way. I can't wait to speak to you next week, same time.
Till
Thank,
next time,
thank you.
take good care.
Namaste.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.